Is baby brain real or absolute rubbish?
It is a real experience that you are having, but I would say it is not your brain that is letting you down. You would describe baby brain as feeling kind of foggy and forgetful. You don't feel like you can pay attention to all of the things you used to be able to do. Like perhaps you feel like your thinking and your cognition was one way and then you had a baby and now it's different. We've kind of got this paradox here between you feeling you feel this way and then you've got someone like me turning around and saying, well, it's not real. What's kind of going on there?
Does your brain then go back to the way? Or?
It doesn't go back completely. So what happens is
feeling confident in your skin is so much more than what you see in the mirror.
And how can you feel good? Well, that starts from within.
Welcome to the In Your Skin podcast. I'm Christy.
And I'm Anna. Join us each week as we sit down with world-leading experts and thought leaders to delve into the latest insights, groundbreaking research, and cutting-edge advancements in wellness, longevity, and beauty.
Dr Sarah McKay, thank you so much for joining us on In Your Skin today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We've been looking forward to this conversation. You have an incredible background as a neuroscientist. I think it's 30 years. Is that correct?
That's aging me.
Well, it's just showing.
Well, I mean, if you consider when I went to uni at 18 and now I'm 50, you could say I'm 32.
That's right.
Wow.
But it just shows your experience. And you've written 3 books, including the Baby Brain or Baby Brain and the Women's Brain book.
Mm-hmm.
And the third one,
Brain Health for Dummies.
Brain Health for Dummies.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to read that one. No.
Yeah, it's not quite as dumbed down as what it sounds like. Some people find it a little bit offensive. But.
No, I love those. I used to love those books at school.
Yeah. But we're going to be talking about a few things today, including baby brain.
Mm-hmm.
Both Anna and myself are mums.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and maybe some of our listeners will definitely relate to some of what we're talking about today.
It's something we talk about all the time, like almost on a daily basis between Christy and I. It's like,
that's why there's
brain.
2 of us, because we need 2 brains, because usually
that was a good one.
Yeah, it's true. We kind of finish each other's sentences because sometimes if I forget something, Anna will remember and vice versa.
Very
true.
cute.
But do you want to take us back a little bit about your background and what got you really interested in the brain, in particular women's brains?
Oh gosh, well, the interest in the brain came way before women's brains. So I started a neuroscience degree in my first year of uni. I grew up in New Zealand, and back then it was a very, very new degree discipline. I don't know what would be the equivalent now, like maybe like cybersecurity or AI or something. So when I went off to uni, I was doing kind of a generalist first year, and I was doing biology and psychology and chemistry, etc. And I was in a Psych 101 lecture, and the lecturer was talking about brains and neurons, which are brain cells and synapses and how they connect. And I was just so captivated by the biological mechanism of synapses, which sounds so totally nerdy, but I was like, get out, that is just the coolest thing. I loved it. So I switched universities to Otago University in New Zealand to do a degree in neuroscience, and was one of the first to graduate from that degree program. I'm still friends with some of the people I went through that program with now. And it's just that absolute fascination and thinking, man, that's cool, has really carried me through. I've never really sort of wavered. I worked as I went off to the UK and I did my PhD. I've moved back here to Sydney. I've done medical research. I set myself up running a business to kind of do science communications within neuroscience, but it's always been within that neuroscience space. I've never wavered from the get out, that's really cool. The women's brain health stuff came really late in the piece. So it was about 10 years ago now. I was writing for the ABC. I had a brain blog, and it was such a cool job. I had to just write this kind of 500-word article once a week on all things neuroscience. And one week the editor said, why don't you write something on brain fog and menopause? And I was like, okay, that's kind of niche. Right, okay. So I went away and did what research I could. I actually interviewed Professor Sue Davis, who's here in Australia, does a lot of work on kind of sex hormones and brain health and menopause. And we published it. It went on Facebook, and it had the most enormous response we'd ever had on a Facebook post before, back when Facebook was a thing. Like literally hundreds of comments and thousands of shares. And we normally might have had 5 comments and a few shares, whatever. It was just like, people are interested in menopause. This is like, it was quite a surprise.
I feel like
It
it's
really
what they were
was.
craving and no one was giving it to them.
Yeah, it was. And looking back on those, you can still see that Facebook post. The blog post doesn't exist anymore, but the Facebook post does. And it is like looking in ancient texts. It's like looking back 1,000 years in time, what the conversations in the comments were. It's like kind of crazy how much has changed. And then kind of on the back of that, I was approached to write a book by a publisher, by a woman, Jean Rickmans, who's now my literary agent, which makes me sound very important. And then she said, why don't you write a book? And I said, I don't know what on. And she said, well, what have you ever written for an audience that has resonated? And I said, I once wrote this article on menopause. And she was like, why don't you write a book on menopause? And at the time, so it was 10 years ago, I was 40. And I was like, why would I write a book on menopause? Like, that seems so niche.
Yeah.
And she said, oh, well, what about baby brain? Is that a thing? And I was like, I don't think there's any research on that at all. And then I thought, well, I could write a book looking at, I thought I could write a book about the neurobiology of the menstrual cycle and anxiety and depression in girls and women. I could write about Alzheimer's disease. I could write about pregnancy, menopause, puberty. I sort of thought maybe I could take a lifespan perspective. And so it was really just sort of piecing together this idea at the time. And then I was like, well, if we kind of take a womb to tomb tour through the life and times of a female brain, maybe that's a book idea. And literally that was really where that journey started. And in the 10 years since, it is wild and exciting to see how the conversation, the research, the space has just shifted. So these felt like very niche topics that no one was doing any research on and no one was interested in 10 years ago now. And now like you can't like look left or right without, your social feeds. I mean, I don't know whether it's the same for you, being filled with stuff about women's health.
Yeah,
it is.
So it's so exciting to be watching that emerge, both, me sort of cheerleading from the sidelines as a science communicator, sharing the research that all of these scientists are doing and just seeing the progression in the research. And then just the interest, like everyone is finally really interested. It's been a really cool last few years.
Yeah, it's actually huge, and especially probably in our mothers group circles, and because it is something that we talk about almost on a daily basis, baby brain, because we're always forgetting things. But I want to settle this.
Always forgetting things.
Very true. So are you. So I think we should start with baby brain and talk a little bit more about it. And I want to settle it once and for all. Is baby brain real or absolute rubbish?
It is a real experience that you are having, but I would say it is not your brain that is letting you down. So what I mean by that is if you would describe baby brain as feeling kind of foggy and forgetful and you forget things and you don't feel like you can pay attention to all of the things you used to be able to do, like perhaps you feel like your thinking and your cognition was one way and then you had a baby and now it's different. And so that's a real experience. If we were to go in and just look at it, thinking about it as being like an issue around cognition, like we can test for, we can do a whole host of different types of cognitive tests, looking at attention and memory, like memory for words, memory for numbers, reaction speed, rotating 3D objects in your mind's eye, like, here's a list of 10 items and I'd come back in 10 minutes and ask you to recall them. There's
and
lots
is this
of different,
before you give birth and after you give birth?
No, these are the kinds of tests we can do. And so then we can go in and we can do those tests on women before they've had a baby, when they're pregnant, or after they've had a baby. And then we can look to see, are we picking up any real changes in cognition? And so 4 out of 5 women will be like the peer review and say, well, when I was pregnant or as a mum, I have baby brain, and we're doing all the cognitive tests and we're not picking up anything at all. So we're not picking up. You're reporting a subjective experience. We're going in as neuroscientists and testing them and going, well, we're not picking up cognitive decline or even cognitive change. And so we've kind of got this paradox here between you feeling you feel this way, you've got this experience, and then you've got someone like me turning around and saying, well, it's not real. What's kind of going on there? And there have been some researchers that have kind of gone in and they're really interested in why do women say they feel like their brains aren't working, and yet all of the studies that we're doing and the tests that we're doing are not picking anything up.
Is it like from pre-pregnancy, would these things have been happening but we're just not taking notice of them. And then they're also happening after, but then we just say, okay, well, that's baby brain. Now I can't think straight.
Yeah, that's partly it. And I will say I didn't have baby brain, but I didn't know it was a thing. I'd never heard of the concept. My boys are like teenagers now, 15 and 17. And I just hadn't come across the phrase, and I didn't experience it. I did have lots of other experiences we can talk about. But if you think about, and we'll talk in a bit more detail about what actually does happen to your brain during a pregnancy. But one of the things that happens to your brain is that you become, it's almost like your brain is very plastic and kind of rewires and reorganizes itself to focus on reading social cues. So what someone else is thinking, what someone else is feeling. A large amount of the brain changes that you see taking place in pregnancy are around social cognition. And so who do you need to be worrying about? What someone else thinks or feels and needs? Is it like your husband or because it's your baby, right? It's your new baby. Like your brain has been completely reorganized to focus in on your baby's needs and wants. And especially with your first baby, you're like utterly consumed with, you cannot think about anything else for every waking moment, especially in those first few days, weeks or months. And that's kind of a bit of a biological mandate, like your brain has reorganized to do that. And if you think about memory, what it actually depends on is attention. So what information you take in and what information you filter out. And when your attention is kind of consumed with the baby, there's so much information you're not taking in and so much information that you're not even filtering out. So there's partly that there. It's partly an attention issue, is that you're thinking about the baby. You're not thinking about the emails. You're not thinking about, did I buy bananas? You're not thinking about, did I iron someone's shirt?
So is baby brain not a real thing, but your attention is just elsewhere?
Yeah, that's part of it. Some of the studies have found that it is very closely related to overall well-being. So even if you go in and look at like women who've had their babies, so you've got birth mothers and then you've got the fathers of those babies, or maybe you've got like a lesbian couple, so there'll be the mum who's not the birth mother. And so there's researchers in Melbourne that have gone and looked across, all of these new parents and said to them, like, do you have baby brain? Like, how would you kind of rate your kind of cognitive capacity? And then compared them to men and women who haven't had babies at all. The people who rate their cognitive capacity and their subjective experience of their kind of cognitive prowess are, perhaps unsurprisingly, men who haven't had babies.
Surprise.
What a surprise. But dads and mums, who are both the birth mum and the non-birth mum, all might be more likely to rate their brains as, I have baby brain. So there's something about parenting. It's not necessarily just having, giving birth and having this new baby in your life. It's kind of about that shift of attention. But the greater the degree of overall subjective or poor well-being, so the lower your degree of well-being, like you're not slept, maybe you're mildly depressed, you're anxious, whatever. There's all of these different kinds of ideas, all these different kinds of experiences you can have that you would put under the umbrella of well-being. The lower your well-being, the worse you rate your cognitive capabilities as well. Yeah. So there's that. And then there's also this idea that, when your attention is focused on the baby, you're doing all of the things. As soon as you forget one little thing, we've almost been primed from puberty that as soon as you've got a female brain, you add in some hormones and a reproductive life transition, that if something goes wrong, it's probably something to do with your brain. It's a malfunction. It's a dysfunction. There's a cognitive decline. There's an instability in there. And
you kind of blame it because you're a woman, basically.
Yeah, and we've almost been kind of schooled from puberty that that's what the case is. But if we're kind of looking overall at all of the studies that have been done, we're not seeing any cognitive decline. I say it's not your brain that's letting you down. It's this sort of ecosystem your brain is trying to function in as a mother, and all of these expectations that you have on you. And you have such high expectations. And there's a bit of a saying, if you want something done, give it to like a super mum. The super mum will do all of the things. And then that's really suits everyone else around her, because if she forgets the thing, she's just going to blame her brain. No one else needs to kind of do anything. There's also some research that's been done looking at, this idea of the mental load or the emotional labor of motherhood. And the greater the kind of the degree of the load that women are taking on, the worse that they will report their baby brain is, even in the absence of any objective measurements there. So it's this kind of like you've got this brain and you're in this ecosystem that you're trying to kind of learn to parent in, plus you've got a brain which is reorganized and rewired to focus in on the baby, but you're also trying to do all of the other things as well.
So men would have baby brain if they were the ones looking after the baby, potentially full time have baby brain.
Yeah, and so the study that's just come out from this research group in Melbourne, Winnie Orchard is one of the researchers in there, I interview her in the book. She's found that dads will report baby brain as well, but then they go in and do all of the cognitive testing, and their brains are working just as well as the men without the kids who report their brains as just being like up here. So that's really interesting. So we're not picking up any actual decline, any problems. It's partly attention, it's partly sleep, it's just partly you're trying to do all of the things. You're looking after this whole new human that you're like learning a whole new skill set.
And it's a sign that you're just doing so much. I feel like I think power to you. If I've got baby brain every day, that means I'm doing a lot more. I'm like probably working harder. I might not be sleeping as well.
And I wanted to write this book because the neuroscience is showing all of these extraordinary changes and strengths and upsides and things that do happen to our brains when we go through our first pregnancy particularly, and when we're going through motherhood. And we never ever hear about the strengths and the upsides. We only ever focus in on when things go wrong, so it must be our brain. So one of the researchers I spoke to for the book Baby Brain has looked at cognitive testing in the third trimester of pregnancy, because there are some studies some of the time that might pick up, you might like say normally you would get 19 or 20 out of 20 in a cognitive test. Some women might be scoring 18 or 19 instead of 19 or 20 in the third trimester of pregnancy, which is also when there's a lot of brain reorganization taking place. You're uncomfortable, you're not sleeping, etc. And she was like, why don't we go in and test for like ecologically relevant, let's do some ecologically relevant cognitive testing. And by that I mean, if we look at the animal kingdom, we look at other mothers in the animal kingdom, when they have babies, they get better at doing what they need to do to keep themselves and their babies alive. So if you've got, say, a predator that needs to like kind of go and hunt food to feed herself and then maybe bring it back to the nest for her young, like a fox or a wolf or something, that mother wolf or fox or predator will get better at predation. She'll be sharper and faster and, she'll be able to pounce quicker. She'll have better pattern recognition. Now, if you're a sheep in a herd of sheep, you're in a flock of sheep with, 20 newborn lambs, like the ewe isn't going to get better at being a predator. She just chews grass, right? But what happens to her brain is when she delivers her lamb, her sense of smell becomes really, really, really well tuned. And it's the olfactory parts of her brain become very, very plastic. Because what a herding animal needs to do is to recognize her lamb out of all of the other 20 lambs that were born that day. So she needs to rely on her sense of smell to be able to identify her lamb. And the little lamb just figures out which is its mum, because that one, if he goes up to a sheep and it's not its mum, then that sheep just kind of kicks it. Whereas once the mother recognizes that's my lamb, she like kind of lets it in and feeds it. So every different kind of species that we've got out there has these kind of ecologically relevant skills that they get better at doing because they need to keep their baby alive and keep themselves alive. So one of the researchers like, well, what would be like kind of an ecologically relevant cognitive test we could do in human women? And this is kind of funny. She wanted to do it in the third trimester of pregnancy. And she was like, well, what are new mums doing in the third trimester of pregnancy? Or, you're a first-time mum. Like, what are you doing in the third trimester?
Nesting.
Yeah, nesting. Yeah. And so what does that involve doing?
Lots of cleaning.
And shopping for baby things. And like
love it.
Going down like the baby, the baby shops. I can't remember what they're like anymore. And, looking at strollers and nappies and, the prices of things, every kind of stroller out there. And so they kind of devised this cognitive testing where they looked to see, do pregnant women in the third trimester have a better memory for like baby related items?
Interesting.
Yeah, and then they tested them against non-mothers and their memory was way better for baby-related items. So it was almost like it was kind of like ecologically relevant. So that was what the mother's attention was completely focused on. And so, of course, they were getting better at that particular task. So there's lots of research like that, which is not kind of necessarily making its way out and into the world that I wanted to kind of highlight.
What about in their second pregnancy?
Well, this is what's interesting. So
She wants to blame it on something.
Yeah. So most of the changes that take place neurologically, and we should talk about them, take place mostly in the first pregnancy because that's like when you become a mother. And so there was not really any, the first research study that was looking at how do women's brains change sort of during the course of their first pregnancy was published at the very beginning of 2017. Now that feels like it's hardly any time ago at all, but that study actually started back in 2009 and there were these three women, these three Spanish PhD students who were working in a research group that did brain imaging, and they were looking at things like spider phobia, and one of them had graduated and they're on their way to a bar, and then she said, oh, well, the next thing I'm going to do is have a baby. And then they were all like, oh, well, what will happen to your brain? Wonder what the brain imaging studies show about what happens when you have a baby. And this is 2009, so they didn't have like the internet on their phones yet. And then they started talking about it on their way to the bar. And then they were like, let's not go to the bar. Let's go back to the research lab and look up on our computers to find the research studies about what happens to your brain when you have a baby. And they realized there was zero studies. There were like no studies whatsoever.
In 2009.
In 2009, they were like, well, we're in a brain imaging research lab. Let's design the study. And then we're all in our early 30s, so why don't we all get pregnant ourselves and scan our brains before and then after our first pregnancies? And we'll recruit.
Was that the reason they got pregnant?
And we'll recruit all of our friends. Yeah, so they all ended up including themselves in the studies.
Oh wow!
But it took
are they happy with their kids now?
Yeah,
or
I think they love their children. But it took a while
good.
because, as you know, you can't go right. I'm going to scan my brain today and next week get pregnant in a 9 months time because we've all had babies, right? It doesn't always happen right when you want it. So it took a while, and they recruited all of these women. But it was really, and then what they did, they were very smart because they were female neuroscientists. Of course, they were smart. They were like, we need a control group. So they thought, well, let's get the fathers of the babies, and then we can see whether if we do see any changes, it's due to like parenting or is it due to pregnancy per se. And that kind of, this research study then this kind of blew open this whole new discipline within the neurosciences. We've got so many more research kind of studies being added all the time. But the long story short was they saw these significant structural changes in the women's brains through their first pregnancy, mostly in parts of the brain involved with social cognition. So as I said, thinking about what someone else is thinking, kind of feeling what someone else is feeling, and then kind of deploying the right kind of behaviors. And in the case of human babies, that's like when they cry, picking them up and cuddling them and feeding them and sniffing them and all of the things that we do. Like we react and respond to crying babies. Like it's almost like we can't keep our hands off them, even though they're crying babies. Like you would think it would be quite aversive, but it's actually like you can't help yourself. Yeah. And what they think was that the changes that take place across your first pregnancy are making your brain so plastic and so that it's almost like becoming streamlined and kind of refined and reactive and responsive. So once baby's out in the world, then that learning curve of how to like react and respond appropriately and learn those kind of mothering skills is that much easier than it would be if those brain changes didn't take place. And so they looked at the father's brains before and after the first pregnancy, and they didn't see any changes whatsoever. So they knew it was definitely due to pregnancy. And in the years since, a lot more research has been done. That study just looked before and after pregnancy because they were kind of a bit wary about doing brain scans of pregnant women. But in the meantime, we've had researchers, one researcher in particular wanted to do a study, they call it like dense sampling. So they wanted to study her brain the whole way through her pregnancy. And so she knew the exact date that she got pregnant because she got pregnant via IVF. And she was like kind of in the research group and said to her fellow scientists, why don't we just scan me? I'm going through IVF. Let's
brain scans dangerous?
No, they're okay. But you probably wouldn't be doing 20 of them just on loads of women. But this woman like kind of understood all of the risks and the benefits and kind of volunteered. It's not going to be dangerous, but you probably wouldn't be doing it unless it was absolutely necessary just to other volunteers. And they took her blood every time she had a brain scan, they took her blood so they knew the exact levels of her hormones. And then they were able to then chart exactly what happened to her brain during the course of that first pregnancy and see that it was largely due to the hormones of pregnancy that were like kind of sculpting and reorganizing all of these circuits in her brain, primarily the social brain circuits, but then also other brain regions which are involved with. There's some stuff in there about like kind of parts of the brain which are involved with kind of just reacting and responding appropriately, like how you kind of deploy behaviors. And so they're able to just see this beautiful kind of progression, not just of like the baby growing, but like the brain changing through pregnancy. And I suppose you could distill it down to the idea that pregnancy is kind of preparing your mind for motherhood. You know, your body's getting ready to nurture the baby, but your brain is getting ready to behave like a mother too.
And so is it the hormones that's driving the changes in the brain?
Largely.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
And so they were able to get quite a nice correlation between the hormones of pregnancy. And there's lots of different hormones of pregnancy. So, you know, your brain ovarian axis is kind of just completely overwhelmed by the placenta. And so you've got a lot of estrogen being produced, a lot of progesterone being produced that you would normally get released from your ovaries across the course of a menstrual cycle. But the placenta just kind of overrides everything and is just pumping all of these hormones out. So you get more estrogen during the course of one pregnancy than you get the entire rest of your lifespan combined.
Wow.
Progesterone is the progestation hormone. So you get lots of progesterone because you want your progestation. And then there's other hormones like prolactin, all of these hormones that are kind of in part still released from like your ovaries, but the placenta is like a giant gland, which is also pumping all of these hormones out. And it's changing, obviously, your body, and we're all familiar with what happens. But it's also reorganizing your brain structures. And we know this from other animals, that this is what happens. Their brain structures reorganize so that they can deploy what we would call maternal behaviors.
And do they stay that way? Or once a year later, does your brain then go back to the way? Or?
It doesn't go back completely. So what happens is if you look at like a brain and it's like kind of all wrinkled and we've got the cortex on the outside, parts of the brain involved that we saw the biggest change in actually becomes like slightly thinner or slightly leaner, I would like to say. I don't like to say they get narrower or smaller because it sounds like it's degenerating. But the exact same thing happens when you go through adolescence as well. We see parts of cortex which are kind of underpinning the behaviors that emerge during adolescence, like being able to like kind of plan and make decisions and kind of critical thinking and judgment, emotional regulation, social skills. Those parts of the brain, the cortex gets kind of slightly thinner, which sounds like degeneration, but in the brain, less is more. It wants to become more streamlined and efficient and kind of leaner and meaner, better at doing what it does. It just kind of gets rid of everything superfluous. And the same thing happens during matrescence, during pregnancy. And so does that bounce back? Some parts of the brain get slightly thicker again in the years post-pregnancy, but it never goes back to what it was.
And is that a bad thing?
No. Well, I mean, it's not a bad thing because your brain has basically reorganized itself to deploy maternal behaviors and to react and respond as a biological mother. So it's not a bad thing. It's kind of what Mother Nature's, we've evolved to do that. What's really cool is if you look, they've looked, so the initial cohort of women in Spain, they looked at them kind of 6 years down the track and they were still able to see structural changes. They've now since gone in and looked at, they haven't followed women through because the studies haven't been going on for that long, but there's big kind of studies of like, say, women in their sort of midlife and also women in their sort of 70s, 80s and 90s. And they were able to go in and look at the brain scans of these women and see that they can say, well, that brain belonged to a mother and that woman was not a mother. She never went through a pregnancy and raised children. So the traces of pregnancy and mothering are still apparent in the brains of women who are even, elderly in their sort of 80s.
So if you don't have a child, then your brain won't adapt in that way?
It doesn't change because it's the pregnancy that sculpts and reorganizes it. And so this is what they did was they went and looked at the fathers of those babies and they saw no structural changes take place. And they've also backed it up a little bit. Some of the research groups in Melbourne and also over in Spain, they're like, if we've got a lesbian couple, so we've got a non-birthing mother and she's still mothering, are we seeing changes in her brain? And no, because it is the pregnancy that's doing it. But what's interesting is they went and looked at a cohort of dads and they didn't compare them to the women. They were like, well, in comparison, their brains won't change. But does something change in men's brains? If we just look at the men's brains only, can we kind of see some subtle differences in there? And they were able to see some subtle sort of structural changes. Some men's brains kind of changed in one direction and other men's brains in another part would change in another direction. But the degree of structural change that they did see was dose dependent. By that, I mean how much like kind of fathering they did, or I hate the word hands-on dad, but how much they were parenting, their brains change more. I mean, if you play golf lots, your brain will change more than if you don't play golf lots. So the more kind of interactions they had with this new little human, the more their brains change, which all brains do. When you do something new and you do it a lot, your brain will change more than if you don't. And if you think about it, like some fathers are only there at conception and never ever seen it again, and other fathers are the primary caregiver. So you would see that kind of variation, whereas all the birth mothers have all gone through the pregnancy, and so their brains have been reorganized by the pregnancy. I suppose as mammals, that's the kind of the evolutionary mandate that we've given birth to them. And so the idea is, doesn't always happen, that you're gonna find mothering and learning how to react and respond to your baby a little bit easier than if you're not.
What about, so you were talking about, I guess, the environment and the well-being of the mother as well. And when you're pregnant, because some women will go through pregnancies feeling very stressed and may not connect to the baby. Is there changes going on in her brain, and does that also affect the baby?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So there's this, I suppose that concept is like maternal instinct. Is that what you, I mean?
Yeah, because I'm kind of talking from personal experience. I was highly stressed in my last pregnancy, and I was anxious, panic attacks. Yeah. I had a rash all over my body. Yeah. It was very traumatic pregnancy.
Yeah, and being pregnant can be very stressful. Yeah. I think standard levels, I mean, just as an aside, like just worrying about like the health of your baby and just having normal kind of stress and anxiety and concern during a pregnancy isn't going to harm the baby. It's more like if it's super extreme, then that's when, especially we need to like kind of take care of the mothers, because if we take care of the mothers, then they'll take care of the babies. We need to kind of have lots of support wrap around. Yeah. And not enough women get that. But was it pregnancy that was kind of making you that way? We know that if
I was one of those running businesses, busy,
doing all of the things.
Doing everything, and then couldn't slow down in the pregnancy. Yeah, and needed to really.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose there's that's a little bit of your body and your brain telling you to slow down. Yeah. And certainly like pregnancy and early motherhood, especially postpartum, is like a window of vulnerability and also opportunity. So there's this opportunity that your brain is reorganized and rewired to deploy the maternal behaviors, but it's also a massive window of vulnerability as well. And some of that is social and some of that is biological. So we've almost kind of got, particularly postpartum, a perfect storm for the emergence of postnatal depression, postnatal anxiety. And part of that is kind of coming off those sky high levels of hormones, that kind of like postpartum hormonal withdrawal, particularly women who know that they are hormonally sensitive, and lots of women have a real sense. Maybe puberty was tough. Maybe you're the kind of person that has PMS. You just kind of know you're a bit more hormonal or a bit more, and your hormone levels are the same as anyone else's. It's just your underlying biology means you're somehow more hormonally sensitive. Yes. And so particularly postpartum, and women will kind of have a sense. It's not like they need to be identifying themselves. We just need to be caring for them more. But that postpartum can be like the perfect storm. And also you throw in lack of sleep. Oh. If you throw in lack of social support, it's almost like, how would someone not become depressed and anxious?
And also disconnected from the baby. So when you're talking about it, because it's interesting, because my first baby and my first pregnancy was so just, I guess, perfect in a way that it was just easy, and I just like fell in love with the baby. And then the second pregnancy, I was like, get the baby out.
And I feel like you weren't connecting with it when it was in there. So then maybe when you came out, you weren't as connected as the first one when you had this beautiful experience.
And also with my daughter, like she's way more sensory. Yeah. And because I think because she probably felt the stress, and maybe I have heard that can change the baby's brain if you are highly stressed, and she's just a very highly anxious or stressed kind of kid. And
well, it's very easy to blame yourself.
I know. Don't worry. I've done lots of work on myself on this.
I think like this idea of, and you've had these two very different experiences, and we'd probably all have each time you have a baby, it's a different experience. And there's this talk about this idea of maternal instinct, and it perhaps sounds a little bit like what I'm saying is your brain is reorganized so that as soon as the baby comes out, you know how to be a mother. And I was so interested in interrogating that idea. One, like, what do we mean by this word maternal instinct anyway? Is it like Mother Nature, or is it the patriarchy? You know, what is this? So it's always somewhere in between. Yeah. But first of all, because I surveyed loads of people in the book and asked, interviewed lots and lots of people. And I was, well, what do you even mean by this word maternal instinct? Because some people mean it like the biological clock or the urge to have babies before you have them. Like you hit 30 and you're like, oh my God, I haven't had them yet. And like, so they would say that's maternal instinct. And so some women would say, I never had babies because I didn't have maternal instinct. Others take it to mean that moment you first hold the baby in your arms after you've given birth to them, like the feeling that you have. And that can range from, oh my God, I've known you my whole life,
it's
to, oh
scary.
Shit. Like it can be.
It's a bit like, who are you?
Or it can be ambivalent. Yeah. And there's so much pressure on that moment to be absolutely perfect.
But even beyond that, because sometimes I feel we work quite a lot, and I have actually someone looking after my youngest today, and she's looked after so many kids. And I said, oh, you're probably a better mum than I am. And I was like, oh, that's not a nice thing to say. But it's getting me teary. No, but it's funny because I'm like, do I have to be with my kids 24/7 to be maternal? And if I'm not, am I a bad mum? I know that's not the case.
And I think that's what we might also think maternal instinct is the knowing of your child more than anyone else. And so we've got all these different experiences as mothers that we almost kind of want to boil down to this one word. And if you don't have this idealistic, perfect experience, the first moment your baby's in your arms or whatever else you're doing in your life, then you're like, does that mean I don't have that's not, I'm not sure what we now mean by that. And a lot of researchers in the space don't like even using that word because it's so loaded. Instead, we might say like maternal behaviors, which are what all adult mammals do. Is when you hear a baby cry, you still approach it and you pick it up and you want to kind of comfort it. But how easy that is varies massively. And I think we have this laser focus on when you're pregnant, the first moment you hold your baby, what that's going to be like, and then that can really colour your experiences going forward if it didn't fulfill the perfect kind of
idea of
what it was going to be like. Maybe I don't have maternal instinct. And then your experience is interesting. So there have been some longitudinal studies done, and this is when you kind of follow a person or a mother and a baby or a group of people like for a long time. Some longitudinal studies go for like 50, 60, 80 years. And they've looked at mothers, they kind of had they call them dyads, mother-infant dyads, mothers and babies from when they were in the hospital. And there's a group in Israel that's done this, and those kids are now in their 20s, and some of them have had kids of their own. And they've looked at mothers that had particularly previous experiences of depression and were already depressed when the babies were born. They were able to kind of see different ways that those mothers interacted with those babies, even from when they were in the hospital, and that they didn't kind of react and respond to the babies in the same way that women who were very, very kind of weren't depressed and so found it easier to react and respond and engage. And that's not to say all hope is lost and, those mothers have failed their babies. It's more that, well, we know that if you're having a tough time, you need support around you to support you in that process of loving your baby.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what I would say. Like, if I was to go back again, I probably should have told people more that I need help, because everyone around me thought I was fine. And like to the point where I was like, everyone was doing the best they could, but like left in hospital while I was literally just had a C-section. I was depressed. I was like crying. And then
you're like, no, I'm fine.
No, I'm fine.
It's just my brain.
I'm fine. Just had a rash all over my body for the past 5 months. Yeah. It was horrific.
And I think we have such high expectations of what motherhood will be and who we will be.
Yeah.
And I only can feel like this now. And this is when I cry, I wish that I had given myself so much more grace and kindness. The word matrescence hadn't even been invented, or probably had been invented, but no one was using it. So I had my boys in 2008 and 2009. And I think had I known that word, that I would have I would have understood that like the becoming of a mother is, and I'm still like figuring out.
Can you explain the word for us?
So it's the best way to think about it is like adolescence is this kind of a word that's very similar to matrescence. It is a word that describes the biology and the sociology and the neurology and almost like the kind of the spiritual experience, the social experience of becoming a mother and adolescence. We understand adolescence as a biological and a social and a neurological and kind of an identity change. And matrescence is exactly the same thing. Like becoming a mother starts even before you might fall pregnant. And I thought when I had my boys, particularly my oldest son, that, I'm like really good at everything I do. So I'm going to be really good at being a mum. And it will be hard, but it'll just be like having a new little person in the house. It'll just like a little small flatmate. He'll come in the house and he'll wake us up at night. And I honestly just thought, the hard bits will be looking after him. I had such straightforward babies. They slept really well. They ate. They grew. They just did everything they were meant to do. They were so straightforward. And I could not get my head around what I thought it was meant to be a mother once I became a mother. I think I had this idea of what motherhood would be, and I didn't realize that every cell in my body had like spun around and reorganized and reshaped, and that it was about this massive identity shift. I used to say, my boys were straightforward, but I didn't like becoming a mother because I didn't know not what I was doing, but I just didn't expect that shift. I had no idea.
What did you do and what did you tell yourself to get out of that? Because there'd be a lot of people that are in the same there's a lot of people in the same situation and position, and they want answers because they feel like they should be feeling a certain way and they're not.
I remember particularly in the first few, and this is really important, and you had this with your, perhaps, you probably had, I don't know whether, obviously you've seen people and you've got diagnosed and whatever happened, whether it was peripartum depression, anxiety, all of the things. I didn't have any of that, but I remember those first few days and weeks after I had my oldest son just being absolutely terrified something horrible was going to happen to him. He was going to fall out of the car or down the stairs or out the window, or I would fall asleep on him and suffocate him, or he would smash his head on the top. Just hundreds of things, like every thought that you can have. And that's because when in your postpartum and you're learning to become a mother for the first time, your nervous system is so hypervigilant. You're like tired and wired. And when you're tired and wired, biologically your brain, because we're humans, just will fill in the gaps. It will like just come up with some things to worry about. It's very easy to find something to worry about. It's like now if you wake up at 3 a.m., you're like,
can't get to bed. It's
3 seconds I can think of something to worry about. Like teenage sons, so much to worry about. And so you start catastrophizing.
Doesn't get better.
You have all these intrusive thoughts. And I just was not expecting that level of fear and anxiety and hypervigilance and tiredness. And so once I kind of recovered from that, I remember, and then I had my second son, they were 18 months apart. I saw a mum today at the park, and I was just walking the dog, and she had like 2 little boys. She said they were 18 months apart, and they were like these blonde curly haired kids like mine were. And I was like, are you okay? I could just see her, and she's like, I've already lived 9 lives. And I said, it's only 9:30.
I feel like that's all
And
moms.
I was like, I wish I could just like do something for you apart from, she said, thank you so much for the solidarity. Like,
what would you tell her, or what did you tell her?
I just said, I know what it's like. There was no, I said it just feels like you're just in the thick of it. And I said,
That's
it does
comforting
get better,
though.
but I said, it is so hard right now. And then I just said, can I help you? Because she was trying to get the stroller out and the kids were going in opposite directions. And I just kind of stood with her. And I said, I know it's so hard. Like, I said, have you got a mother's group? Like, have you got, she said, and we just kind of chatted. I just wanted her to go. I don't think there's any way except for through. But I remember I used to feel like I got nothing achieved. And and at that point of time, I wasn't working except emptying the dishwasher and crying a lot. And then I would get to 3 p.m. and I'd be like, oh my God, I've still got like 3 or 4 hours. And
you've just changed nappies and done the dishes.
I used to feel so angry all the time. I felt like I was filled with rage. And I was like, I've never been an angry person. And now I understand a lot of that's just around biology. And also the expectations of who I thought I would be as a mother versus the reality, which was pretty like boring and banal and like, we know what it's like. And then I went and saw this amazing therapist. I went to my GP. She said, "You're not depressed or anxious." She said, "But go and talk to someone."
Yeah.
And she was quite right. I wasn't. And that therapist said to me, she said, and she kind of took a bit of a Buddhist approach, which was really lovely. She said, "Oh, you know, like everywhere in the world, people are sweeping their houses and everyone's got a dirty kitchen floor." And she said, everyone everywhere in the world has to sweep their kitchen floor. And I was like, it's not just me.
That's actually a really nice way to see it.
I was like, it's not just, she said, everyone's kitchen floor gets dirty. And she said, and everyone has children. And she said, and everyone's children have socks that fall off.
Yeah.
And she said, and every little crumb that you wipe up, I still remember this, and every little sock that you pick up and roll up into a ball, she said, is just everyone in the world is doing that. Like, it's just part of the process of turning your boys into men. And she just says, remember, everyone is sweeping a floor. Everyone is picking a sock up.
You're not alone.
You're not alone. Even though you feel alone, this is just kind of part of it. And it was just kind of accepting that it was normal to feel this way. Because I thought if I was a really good mum, it would be easy and I wouldn't feel that way. I was not anxious and depressed. I was angry, but it was just the expectations of what I thought it would be like versus the reality. And I thought, if I was feeling that way, I must be doing something wrong.
If you want in on the secret to firmer, smoother skin.
Oh, yes, please.
Well, then you're going to want to hear about Olay's new Ultra Firming Serum right here.
It's their lightest, most powerful serum yet, and it literally feels like water when you apply it. But most importantly, it's packed with serious actives for firmer and smoother skin from day one.
It's formulated with PHCA, a revolutionary antioxidant that works 3.5 times better than vitamin C and bakuchi oil, which is a retinol-like alternative that is clinically proven to be as effective as retinol.
It's also great for sensitive skin, and I love that it's not just one benefit. You're going to get 5. Fewer lines, firmer skin, smoother texture, smaller pores, and real hydration.
You should start to see results from day 1. Your pores may look smaller. By day 14, wrinkles should start to soften. And by day 28, you hope to see a visible lift.
You can grab it now at Chemist Warehouse. Give it a go and let your skin do the talking.
Now, I want to go back to when we were younger and I want to talk about girls versus boys' brains.
Yes.
And whether or not they're different.
When we're talking about what is a brain and how is a brain of your brain different to your brain, different to my brain, a brain can be 1,000 things. So we can look at like the size and the shape and, you know, how's it structurally organized and what neurons go where and what are the neurotransmitter levels, and we can do cognitive testing and we can look for susceptibility for disease and sensory processing. There's like 1,000 different metrics or measures that we can have when it comes to a brain. And when we're looking at males versus females, we need to be looking across populations and we need to be looking at all of these thousands of different measures. And this is where it kind of gets complicated because say you've got a little girl in Dublin and she's like really into Taylor Swift, she's like 9. And then you've got a guy who's like going to Harvard and he's going to play basketball and he's like, you know, total bro. And then you've got, say, a woman in India on her 3rd pregnancy and she never finished primary school. She lives in poverty. And then perhaps, you know, you could go and look at like, you know, a law professor in Argentina and then like an elderly lady in a nursing home in Australia. You've got the differences between these people and all of these measures that you make of their brains are not all going to boil down to biological sex because, you know, you're not going to compare this. You're just not kind of comparing like with like. So there's hundreds of different measures that we can make of a brain, and there's hundreds of different people with different life experiences. That said, some of those measures we know will be different if you looked at a group of males and a group of females. What the kind of the problem is are those differences there because biology kind of do those differences emerge purely because of biology? Or did those differences emerge because of like the experiences you've had, like the woman in India versus the guy going to Harvard?
And also because you were saying when you're younger and you're looking at a boy versus a girl brain before the age of 5, they're almost identical.
Yeah, they're going to be very, very similar. So there are some very subtle differences that we would even see in utero in terms of what we would call how brains become kind of organized before sex hormones would activate them at puberty. So if you're looking at little boys' brains and little girls' brains kind of up until the ages of 5, we're not going to be able to open up someone's skull and have a look and see any differences in the brains. The only differences we might see, and we'd have to look like, 1,000 boys and 1,000 girls. On average, some of those boys' brains are going to be slightly bigger than the girls, but that's because on average, baby boys are slightly bigger than average baby girls. And then the biggest kind of difference when we sort of start to see more differences emerge is around puberty, because we've got the sex hormone kind of added to the mix. So the girls have got the estrogen and progesterone, and the boys have got the testosterone, and we know what happens to their bodies. Their brains also go through puberty too. So we start to see differences which may be driven by sex hormones kind of emerging at that point. But again, there's also a lot of overlap. Like height is like a massively sexually dimorphic difference between males and females. So the example I would give is like, one of my parents is 6'3" and the other's 5'3". It's pretty obvious which one's my dad, but I have a 6-foot tall sibling. But I have a sister who's 6 foot tall. She's genuinely very tall. And we understand height very, very clearly when we think about that, because we know that we know on average men are taller than women, but there's also really tall women and really short dudes, the short kings. So brains are a little bit like that as well. There's always going to be similarities and there's going to be overlaps too. There is some really interesting research where if we look at people's brains in like midlife, say you're in your 30s, we can go in and do brain scans, and we would know that there might be subtle, say, volume differences in some parts of the brain, whereby in women the volume might be greater in this part of grey matter, and in men it might be greater in this part of white matter. And so if you look across the globe at people in their 30s, this has been done, the study's fascinating. They looked at different people in different countries and then ranked those countries based on gender equality. So how, what was the access to like primary, secondary, tertiary education? What is the access to what we would call enriched opportunities like work, etc. And in countries with more gender equality, so like say Scandinavian countries, and actually Australia is very, very high on that global scale, males and females' brains are more similar. But in countries where there's more gender inequality, and in this study, Turkey and Brazil were the countries that were kind of, and India were those three countries the lowest on the scale, the brains of the men and women were more different.
So who was smarter, men
well,
or women?
It was not about smarts. What is interesting is the males' brains everywhere in the whole world were the same. The difference was the women's brains in the countries with the gender inequality kind of deviated. And that is because the women growing up in those countries, well, the researchers thought there's a couple of things going on here. We've got less access to opportunities like education and employment. So you've got less enriched opportunities, which is almost kind of slowing the development or hindering the kind of, those brains had the capacity and the opportunity to develop. They had grown up in Sweden versus, say, India. That's where the differences kind of came, and perhaps maybe the stress of gender inequality as well.
But I also feel like for me that when I was younger, I thought I can't be as smart as a boy. So it kind of hindered me and pulled me back a little bit, where I didn't want to reach my full potential. I was too scared to. I felt like I couldn't do the things that boys could do. I always wanted to prove to everyone I could, but I always felt like, I'm not going to, if I'm smart, I'm not going to say I'm smart. I'm just going to hold myself back a bit. And I feel like that stems, like you said, from a very young age when it comes to.
Yeah. So I get the research you're talking about now. Yeah. So there is, I suppose there's this idea, and it's even like, I said about the study of like men who weren't dads yet, dads, mums, like who rates their brain capacity is like amazing, and it's always like the dudes. They're always like, I'm awesome. And I have teenage sons. They're like, I'm awesome. And that like, hubris, like I am awesome no matter what, is definitely kind of more of a male thing than a female thing. And so it's like, is that biological? Is this like kind of wired into them, or is it something social that they've learned? And so studies they've gone back and like kind of looked and like the first kind of few years of schooling. So you've got kids who come in at age 5, and this has recently been done for maths as well, which is kind of wild. The study in France was looking at, so one is like the attitude to your ability and your sort of smartness. And 5-year-olds will all start school, and all the little girls will go, I'm amazing and smart. And all the little boys will go, so am I, and I'll play the game for smart kids. And I'm going to grow up to be, a scientist who's going to save the whales or whatever. They're all the same. couple of years of schooling, you go in, you test them again, you ask them the questions, show them the Smart Kid games, and all of the boys are still there, and some of the girls, not all of the girls, but some of the little girls are starting to go, well, the boys are the smart ones, or the boys are the ones who do the Smart Kid thing. And so I don't think the answer is we should not educate girls, rather just be really aware of what it is going on in their early years of schooling. This wild study was just published in France. This came out a couple of months ago. Because we know if we tested like 1,000 boys and 1,000 girls in maths, say ages 9, 13, you did your NAP plans, the boys would score slightly better in maths. The average would be slightly more, and there'll be more boys getting higher marks. Girls would do better in the verbal reading. And it's like, does that mean that boys are biologically better at maths? This study in France was looking at kids, day one, test them all with maths. Boys and girls, exactly the same. 4 months later, went back, and within 4 months of schooling, the boys had started to pull ahead in maths. And this was everywhere around France, all of the different schools. And then because in France, they've got a really strict cutoff for the age at which kids start school. And so they were able to look at kids who were born a day apart, but were in completely different years of schooling because of the strict cutoff. And it was not about age. It was literally about 4 months. And within 4 months of schooling, the boys had slowly started to pull ahead. So there's something going on there.
I wonder if there's differences then in co-ed versus like all girls' school or boys' school.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether they looked at that in France. And they have looked. And I mean,
because in my mind, I was thinking, are the boys starting to tease the girls, or the girls starting to worrying about what the boys are doing?
Do you know what? It's the adults.
Right.
And I think that this is the problem, because I think we can inadvertently say things that are very well intentioned, and perhaps we can say girls can, and I have a real problem with this. Yeah. We might say girls are good at maths too.
Yes.
That is the implicit message in that is too. Maths is a boy thing and girls can also do that. Being smart is a boy thing and girls are also smart. They can opt into the smart boy thing. And so there's something about the way that we are teaching kids and talking to kids, and even if we're very well intentioned, we shouldn't ever be saying boys are like this and girls are like this and girls can also do this and boys can also do that. Rather, we should, all kids are equally capable of learning maths.
But also knowing that your brain is the same, and even telling a story like this, if teachers were to tell the story to their kids, then maybe they won't start thinking, okay, the boys are going to be smarter or the girls aren't as smart
or
as
the boys
us.
can't sit still and learn to read, but they can do maths. And so we very, very, very quickly might see a subtle difference and then blow that up into a massive gender stereotype. And that's what they think is what's happening here, is it's a gendered stereotype that's being picked up and the kids are absorbing that. And there are various studies that have been done, all around the world, looking at all kinds of situations which they call, it's called like stereotype threat. So before you test kids, say like you've got a bunch of 15-year-olds, you say we're going to do a maths test, but boys are better at maths than girls, then by just saying that you've given them a gender stereotype, the girls will perform less well than if you didn't say that, because it's almost like they're trying so hard to prove it wrong, they end up kind of stumbling.
And it's also the power of positive thinking and believing in yourself and knowing that you can do something and knowing that it is possible as well.
Yeah. So that the capabilities are there from the beginning. Everyone's equally capable. It just so happens that boys start pulling away slightly, and perhaps we're inadvertently giving all of these kids that message. And it's interesting, the studies that have done asking you, do you want to be smart or not, or who wants to do this? You see the kind of the reverse when you talk about being nice, because who identifies with who's the nice person, who are going to be the nice kids in the class. Niceness and kindness is, what the girls are doing. The boys are being smart and clever, but the girls are being nice. And it's almost as if you're starting to see niceness kind of being kind of seen as kind of a virtue versus being clever. And the boys just kind of take that idea and run with it, and the girls take the niceness and run with it. And then you start to see differences kind of play out once they get into high school as well. Whereas, the girls of, we're all swimming in this kind of social world. We're all socialized in certain ways. Boys don't have to be as nice to each other and can be far more competitive and, kind of cope with hierarchy, and they might not like it, but they kind of understand it and they kind of work within it and they can compete with each other in the classroom was girls are less likely to kind of want to compete with their friends, say for grades or rankings. And so you do start to see differences emerge in, overall test scores, which are nothing to do with innate capability, just rather to do with how we've kind of socialized and absorbed these stereotypes.
Now, I want to speak about something that affects over 100 million women worldwide. Do you know what it is?
I don't know.
The contraceptive pill.
Oh, yeah. I love some contraception.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk about it because there is so little that is known about the pill and what the effects are of the pill. Can you sort of talk us through that and basically let us know what is known about the pill and why we don't know much?
Well, we know a lot about the pill, just not a lot about the pill and the brain. And we are starting to fill the gaps. So women's health, there's always been a lot of gaps within women's health, but there are some amazing researchers, read about them in my books, who are doing a lot of amazing work in this space. So amazing work, amazing women. And we've been taking the pill for like 50 years or something now. So we've got some pretty good data on its contraceptive capabilities. You know, it's given women a whole lot. I think that there are some women who it doesn't suit. And so we need to be very, very careful whenever we're talking about anything like this to not kind of so everyone all of the time, not just some people some of the time. So, you know, I think the pill is getting a bit of a tough time at the moment. It's getting a bit of a bad rap because there are some women who it doesn't necessarily suit very well. So when I was writing my first book, a study came out, it was kind of 2016, 17-ish, looking at the role of the pill in depression. And lots of women would say, I went on the pill, it made me depressed, I stopped. Other women are like, I was depressed, I went on the pill, it made me better. We don't often hear the kind of the upsides of these stories. Some women like have terrible PMS, they go on the pill, it gets better.
I went on the pill for my skin.
Yeah,
well, that's what I told my mum.
Yeah, they go on the pill for their
but
skin.
It did clear it up.
Really
they tell their mums it's for that.
I'm going on the pill. Yeah.
And this study was interesting because it was looking to see if you've gone on the pill, what's your risk of going on to develop depression. We need to be very, very careful because of how sort of statistics are reported. And this is just super nerdy, but if you are into statistics, you should absolutely report absolute risk because you want to know the risk that you as an individual have of going on to perhaps having a side effect that's not just like contraceptive, but perhaps depression. And it turns out that if kind of looking across the lifespan and looking across when we would see the greatest vulnerabilities for people developing depression after they go on the pill, it's definitely younger teenagers. I'm like kind of sounding a bit distracted here because I'm not wanting to say the numbers out loud because they're written in the book and I don't want to kind of get the absolute numbers wrong. But we tend to see about 4% to 5% of girls who start taking the pill when they are young teenagers, say 14, 15, 16, go on to then develop depression as a result of the pill. Although it's very hard to know whether it's directly due to the hormones of the pill or, you know, you're a 15-year-old, you've gone on the pill. Why have you gone on the pill? Maybe you are in a sexual relationship. You don't want to get pregnant. It could be a pretty chaotic time of your life, which is also going to exacerbate your depression. So it's kind of in young people very hard to sort of tease that out.
I think the scariest thing is that there hasn't been those tests and you are taking something every single day and we don't really know how it is affecting your brain.
Yeah, and this is what we are starting to kind of learn and understand. So we've kind of got, if we look across large populations of women, and studies have come out of places like Denmark and Sweden where they've got really, really good health records, and we can look at like 1 million women and look to see what is the increase in risk from, you know, like 5% per year to 6% per year being diagnosed if you're on the pill versus not. And the risk generally tends to fall on the younger teenagers. Now, that doesn't mean every teenager who takes the pill gets depressed. The increased risk is about 4% extra girls a year. So 4 in 100 girls. So you've got 100 girls taking the pill, 4 of them are going to get depression. 4 more of them will get depression than if they were not taking the pill, right? So it's actually 4 in 100. It's an increased risk, but it's not massive. It's not like 100% of them. When you're looking at women over the age of 20, you're not necessarily seeing an increased risk. That said, some women go on the pill, they don't like it, they stop. Women who stay on the pill often stay on the pill for a really, really long time. So you have got a bit of a survivorship bias there. And some women are just what we would call hormonally sensitive. Like they don't really kind of cope with those kind of fluctuations or, kind of come, especially women who like cycle on and off the pill over the course of a month. They have the pill 3 weeks, so they bleed. You'd see less kind of variation in mood in women who just take the pill and just run it on, which you can do perfectly. It's perfectly healthy and safe to do that. We've got decades of data around the safety profile of the pill, but there are some women who are going to, they're going to have side effects. Maybe they'll have blood clots or depression or whatever, but it is a very, very, very small number of women.
And is that because they're more sensitive to the hormones?
Yeah. So you've got different types of hormones and different kinds of generations of pill, and you are taking synthetic hormones because you're taking it orally. And in some women, when that kind of gets processed by the liver, it can increase their risk of blood clots. And typically, if that's going to happen, it happens within the first few months of them taking the pill. It becomes very obvious that it's not going to suit them, and then they would come off it. But if we look kind of across the course of the lifespan and go, women who've taken the pill and it's suited them for years, and lots of women take it for you could take it for 20 or 30 years, and there's plenty of women that do that. The data is actually really interesting because there's obviously, they're the women who it suits. If we go and do cognitive testing on those women, particularly if those women are taking older generations of the pills, which were slightly more androgenic and that they were kind of the hormones in the pills kind of almost acted slightly more like androgens or more testosterone-like. It wasn't testosterone in the pill, but your body just kind of processes it that way. They actually show better scores of cognition than women who are not on the pill. And there's actually some studies done looking at across the different generations of pills. When you've got more androgenic pills and ones that are anti-androgenic, you can actually see differences in cognitive test scores. And there's studies done from the UK Biobank, which is looking at, older women, like casting back, looking at their medical history and looking at Alzheimer's disease risk. And they're actually seeing a lower risk of Alzheimer's disease in those women that were on the pill for many, many years. Obviously, women for whom it's suited and they're happy being on it, their brains actually appear to be slightly more resilient and slightly more protected against aging, which is not a story that you're hearing out there on social media. You're only ever hearing the kind of the downsides, and that's because, and I'm allergic to penicillin. I'm not going out there telling people no one should be on antibiotics because I'm allergic. We're all different, right? And some of us it suits and it can have long-term health upsides, and other people it doesn't suit and might have, and hopefully short-term health downsides such that they stop and look for other kinds of, sources of contraception or whatever they're using it for. So there's lots of really interesting research which is sort of starting to emerge around that. We look at what's happening in our brains. So bearing in mind we've got receptors for hormones in our brains. And when you're on the pill, you're suppressing your natural cyclical levels of ovarian hormones, which is why you're not becoming pregnant because you're not ovulating. And that is fine to do. If it suits you, there's no harm done. It might actually have a cognitive benefit. It's really interesting because as you naturally cycle, if we were to image the networks in your brain, and this is like how different parts of the brain connect and react and respond to each other, you can kind of see those connections kind of fluxing and waxing and waning across the cycle, almost like ebbing and flowing as hormones ebb and flow. And then when you take the pill, you've got low levels of your natural hormones and quite high but stable levels of synthetic hormones, and you don't see that same kind of ebb and flow in the brains of women on the pill. And so there's lots of scientists out there that are starting to do all these studies on themselves, like the ones that get pregnant and image their brain. There's researchers that have gone in and imaged their brain every single day across the menstrual cycle. Then they've taken the pill and they've imaged their brain again for another month, and they've gone off the pill and imaged their brain again to look to see what happens. And they see that kind of the ebb and flow in the brains, happens on a natural cycle as your hormones ebb and flow, and then it reacts and responds in a much more stable way on the pill. And that, for some reason, for some women is interesting, because for some women that ebb and flow is just like, oh, whatever, you just kind of float through life. Other women, it's like riding an emotional roller coaster. Other women, that flatlining might make them feel stable and emotionally stable. And for other women, they might feel emotionally flat. So we've all got like kind of different ways in which how our brains respond to hormones then in turn make us feel.
It is really interesting because everyone, again, is individual and,
absolutely,
like you said, how your body reacts.
And I think right now there is a really strong anti-pill sentiment, and I spoke to quite a lot of researchers about this because some of the researchers who work on hormonal contraceptives are actually quite reluctant to talk. They, I didn't have to twist their arms, but, I had to say, go and talk to I've spoken to this scientist, go and check me out, I'm legit. Because especially in the US where a lot of this research is being done, we all kind of know what's happening over in the US with women's reproductive health rights. And there's also this strong anti-pill sentiment. And so some of the researchers are really nervous about going out and talking about their research because they don't want it to be used or misused or abused or used to kind of push some type of agenda.
So it sounds like our hormones, so regulating your hormones and looking after your health can help with your brain health.
100%, yeah. And we know across the course of the lifespan, by and large, you could say like the more estrogen you're exposed to across the course of your lifespan, whether that be the length of time in years between when you have your first period and menopause, and that could be, 28 years in some women and 38 years in others, how many pregnancies you have, whether you're on hormonal contraceptives, despite what social media is sort of saying, and maybe even hormone therapy for menopause, the more estrogen you've got in the system, the healthier your brain will be, like the better your cognitive health and perhaps the better your overall resilience to brain aging. But what's really difficult is when we're looking at older women and we're kind of casting back, it's hard to know, was it the pregnancies? Was it the pill? Was it the length of time between, menarche and menopause? But we do know that like, I suppose we could sort of say estrogen per se is kind of like, helps promote brain health and resilience.
Yeah, because I thought I was going through perimenopause purely because I couldn't remember things. Like there were times when I'd put my keys in the dishwasher or I would literally just forget an appointment or be putting things in my diary completely out of whack and I'd miss meetings. Like there's been so many times. Christy almost
You went from baby brain to brain fog.
Yeah, I did. And I'm like, okay, so what is happening with me at the moment? I want kind of answers and I don't know what I should be taking. Is there certain supplements that I should be taking? Because even my husband recently, he's on a set of a movie and he has to learn a lot of lines and he's been taking creatine. I know there's been a lot of talk about creatine.
I think creatine got invented about a month ago.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, he says.
Or someone's marketing it right now.
But he said, like, he's been taking it. And I've never taken creatine.
Yeah.
And so I don't really know. But he said he's been taking it and all of a sudden he can, like, learn his lines better. And whether or not he thinks because he's on it or it's actually doing it.
There's probably a bit of both there,
what can women be doing in their 30s, in their 40s, and even beyond perimenopause for brain health?
Yeah. I do worry now that there's also so much talk about perimenopause that women are going from like postpartum to perimenopause and not giving themselves time to recover. Like
I feel like that's me because I've heard so much about it and I'm like, where am I? What am I meant to be doing?
And this is like why I wrote Baby Brain was like, well, I never heard of it and I didn't have it. Was that like, because when it comes to our brains are taking on board all of this information from our body, our hormones, from all kinds of things, all of the food you eat and the exercise you do, you've heard all of that. But also the messages that we receive, and our brain is making meaning of the messages we receive, and wherever we're like kind of paying our attention or we're told to like kind of focus, that will make something feel better or feel worse. It's not all in your head, but attention is part of any experience you have. And if you've been told you have baby brain, if you forget something, like I said, you'll blame your brain instead of kind of thinking, my brain is completely fine, it's just functioning in this kind of complex ecosystem of learning to parent. And now, like here was I at 40 thinking, I'm not going to write a book about menopause because that's something mum did. And I've just turned 50. So like my entire social media algorithm is either summer I turned pretty, cocker spaniels and springer spaniels or menopause. And that's despite me trying to like hack it all. And there's a lot of Taylor Swift as well, which is quite nice.
It's quite nice.
Yeah, that's quite
Their
nice.
story's nice.
Yeah. So I think what is happening to women's brains during their, let's just say 40s, like I don't want to like have people in their early 30s. If you're going through, the typical age of your last period is around 50-ish, right? Where I am right now. And I don't know whether I'm there or not. I'm kind of teetering on the edge. And so the time leading up to your last period. It could be 5 years, it could be 10 years. Hopefully it's not 10 years. Like, you really don't want to be doing this when you're in your 30s.
Yeah.
Your cycles will kind of get shorter and then they'll get longer. And this is all to do with your eggs running out, and that conversation between your brain and your ovaries sort of starting to like kind of roller coaster. One of the first signs often that women have is sort of changes in anxiety and changes in sleep. And that is very, very closely related to changes in hormones. And part of that's is almost directly due to changes in thermoregulation, which I don't think a lot of people kind of necessarily understand as a brain phenomenon. And so
can you explain
you've got,
more?
So in your brain, you've got like a thermostat, which is kind of like a nice set level of your body temperature. And for some women for some reason in women, estrogen sets the thermostat. I don't know why evolution decided that, but that's the case. And as soon as estrogen sort of starts roller coastering, and you would notice this when you were breastfeeding as well. You used to get like the sweats, like your thermoregulation's all kind of over the place. Your thermostat in your brain gets much narrower, so it only needs a tiny rise in body temperature for your brain to think it's really hot in here. We need to cool down really, really quick. And so to cool you down, you start releasing heat. So you have like what they call hot flashes. You start sweating. If you are asleep at night and you have a really major kind of like hot incident, hot flash, your brain is desperately trying to cool you down, and you sweat, and it's like you need to also behave in a way to cool you down, not just physiologically respond. And so your brain then has to wake you up, so you throw the covers off to cool down. Now, even if that is not happening, even if you're not quite at that point, as soon as your thermoregulation starts to kind of alter a little bit, it completely changes your sleep architecture, which are all those nice kind of levels of sleep that you kind of go in and out of through the course of the night. And it doesn't take much of a change in thermoregulation and much of a hormone shift to start changing your sleep architecture. And as soon as sleep's muddled up, even if you're not waking up at night, you might be sleeping for 8 hours, but you're waking up and going, I just feel tired. And anxiety is kind of wrapped up in that, because every time your brain partially wakes you up to try and cool yourself down, it has to activate your sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is being activated, so you sweat, so you cool down, and then sometimes and women who are like in their late 40s will know this, you kind of wake up, like you're sound asleep, and then you wake up like you've been given a fright, and you can feel the adrenaline like going all through your legs. Like literally you can feel the adrenaline, and then you're like, but I'm just like lying here. And then it's really hard to get back to sleep. And that constant sympathetic activation, it's a little bit like postpartum. Your whole nervous system becomes very, very hypervigilant. And then your brain starts going, why am I so nervous and worried? And then just starts filling in the gaps. And so then you've got a perfect storm again of lack of sleep, hypervigilance, worry, anxiety. And of course, you're going to start be feeling a bit foggy the next day. You've got the subjective experience of brain fog.
But does your brain deteriorate over time?
It's not deteriorating. It's getting older, but that doesn't mean it's on this inevitable decline. And this is the big thing. We don't know where the brain fog, and particularly in women, it's like words. My particular specialty is swapping one word for another word, like saying lid instead of hat, or microwave instead of washing machine.
That's me all the time.
I'm just saying I'm saying the thing, and then the wrong word comes out of my mouth, and my boys are like, Mum.
That's me. I'm like, I want to fix it.
Words. So the thing that we don't know is, one, is it directly due to hormones somehow changing the networks in your brain such that particularly your verbal recall is slightly altered, or is it this kind of downstream effect of the disrupted sleep architecture? Because if your sleep architecture is disrupted, you're inevitably going to be not at your cognitive best the next day. But what's also really interesting is if we look at women going through this whole perimenopause period and we do the repeated cognitive testing, we're not always picking up again this massive cognitive decline. It's not like you're showing signs of like Alzheimer's disease or even mild cognitive impairment. In fact, you might be kind of scoring completely normally. So sometimes, there's this bit of this kind of paradox. I'm feeling this way. The good news is you're not on the cognitive decline. It's probably just due to all of this disrupted sleep, etc. There are some women, though, that do show, these kinds of changes in their cognitive test scores during that time. But typically once they get out to the other side, the test scores start kind of improving.
So we should get time off. when we have babies, go through menopause.
I think you've just got to realise
get paid for it.
Your brain is reacting and responding to everything that happens, and it reacts and responds to hormone shifts. It reacts and responds particularly to sleep. It reacts and responds to, I always say, like, the ecosystem it is functioning in. But what brains do as they get older, and again, we only talk about all the things that we lose because we're comparing our brains to like the 18-year-old dude who's like got the really, the sharpness, the quick thinking, the problem solving, the working memory. We're not looking at the other things that brains do as they get older, which I think there might be like kind of an evolutionary benefit for, a little bit like baby brain, like our brains tune in to become more flexible and responsive and efficient when it comes to looking after babies. Yeah, we get wiser. And we do have some good evidence showing that there are skills that actually peak at this age. And we've got this really cool thing that happens in our brain as it's getting older. We do see shifts in kind of, metabolism, and we do see sort of, we are seeing shifts in response to hormone fluctuations, but the brain adapts and responds. And it's almost as if it used to, this part did this job and this part did that job. It's all sort of segregated and each little bit worked kind of independently. And as brains get a little bit older, they start to kind of cooperate and the networks kind of start to interact and become more kind of integrated. It's almost as if each little part of the brain goes, hey guys, we need a little bit more manpower. Like, let's all kind of work together to get this job done. So the brain will react and respond because it retains its plasticity, right? It can still get the job done. It just might kind of go about that in a different way. But we never kind of look at like the upsides of what's the outcome of that. And that's, we see, more behavioral flexibility, we see pattern recognition. You've got more crystallized intelligence, which is literally, more stuff. Your verbal recall will be better as you get older. Your vocab's better. Your emotional regulation typically gets better. You've literally got a life of experience behind you, but we tend to focus on the fact that we weren't as quick at remembering someone's name, or we forgot the one little thing.
But is there anything that we can be doing to keep that up? Like, if I do want to remember everyone's name, I want to remember what I'm picking up. It's not a bowl, it's a plate.
Yeah.
Is there anything I can be doing, or is there anything I can be taking, like, to train my brain?
I think partly where our attention is just become shot, and we're banning social media and phones in the teenagers. And I don't think that people your age, my age, are necessarily, I know I've always got like a podcast playing in my ear. Like, my attention is not what it used to be because I'm not training my attention in the same way. I'm often always never multitasking or task switching. So often when I'm doing things, I'm listening to a podcast. It's very, very rare where I'm like kind of monotasking on one thing, even if it's just sort of stuff around the house. And so when you walk in the door and you forget where you put your keys, if you walked in the door and you had a hook where you always put your keys, you wouldn't forget where you put your keys. It's just, we kind of walk into a room and we don't continue to pay attention step by step to everything that we're doing. So we kind of need maybe to put some more systems and processes in place.
It's quite basic, but it's very true.
And then also understand how much that phone literally is distracting us. So I was in a conference the other day, and there was a researcher got up and was talking about, and I've talked about all different kinds of cognitive testing we can do to test all kinds of, aspects of memory and attention and whatnot. And they've done studies where they've like just let someone have their phone like kind of next to them like that and do the cognitive test, and then the phone's out of the room, or then the phone is like even next to them and turned off. And even if the phone is next to them and turned off, their test scores are much lower than if the phone was in the other room. Even the phone next to them, it's distracting, but the phone next to them and turned off is still a distraction. Just enough of that, it might be there. Oh, no, it's not. Then you
that's the same.
It might be there.
If you both have your phones down, and then your partner or whoever picks it up next to you, then automatically you're like, okay, I've got to.
And it's so hard not to get it.
It's so addictive.
And so the cognitive testing has shown that having it next to you will lower your score. And so we're constantly, our attention is always kind of constantly going to the phone. But again, we're going, do I need creatine, or do I need, creatine is actually probably quite good for our brains, and, like we've got such great evidence for menopause hormone therapy to help with your hot flashes and maybe help with your sleep and maybe help with your perimenopausal depression. We've got all of those kind of medical, and the supplements we can take, the exercise we can do, the sleep, et cetera. Problems with attention, I think, are because of like I said, it's not our brains, it's the ecosystem our brains are in. And the phones are we're worrying about teenagers. I think we also need to be thinking about how distracting they are for us. And one, how much attention we pay to them. And two, when your phone is in your hand and there is a war on the other side of the world that maybe once upon a time you only ever saw on the 6 o'clock news, like your brain doesn't know it's like not in your hand. The war's not in your hand. And it's constantly streaming in, and you're meant to make meaning of that and reflect your feelings on that back out into the world, which is, again, occupying a lot of energy and attention. What did Taylor Swift say? Like your attention and your energy is so precious and only a few people, can afford it. She's such a wise woman.
We're in it. We're coming into.
I'm glad you quoted Taylor Swift.
Of course.
We are coming into a bit of a crazy time with AI and all that kind of stuff. And
oh my goodness,
I mean, we're running out of time. I would just quick thoughts on AI and what's going to be happening to our brains. But and we got one more question after that.
I use it quite a lot. You know how you're not meant to use it as a therapist? I find it actually quite useful. I'm like old enough to tell it to don't just reassure me, like challenge me. I think it's really, I think right now it's a useful tool and no one quite knows how to put the genie back in the bottle. But then the same thing happened with phones, the same thing happened with the printing press, the same thing happened with TV. I'm not sure as a neuroscientist what impact it's going to have on our brains.
Are we going to get lazy or dumber?
Me, I feel like I have massively the potential to become lazier, but I'm trying to tell myself it's allowing me to be more efficient. But sometimes I think if I'm using it to write the email instead of using my own brain to write the email, I'm thinking I'm freeing my time up. But then I'm freeing my time up to scroll on Instagram, which is terrible. So,
but also to do more. Like I find I'll do one thing and it might free my time, but I'm like, I'm just on to the next task and I'm on to the next task and it just keeps going.
And again, then we're losing that ability to, like, I don't know if you've just tried to sit down and read a paper book. Like
difficult.
It's hard. Like I think we've lost the ability to have a longer term attention span and do the things that are harder. So I think whenever anything now feels hard, we don't have to do it. Once upon a time, we had to read a map in a book and we had to navigate and so now it's easier not to do that. So we're not, and one of the things that we know that we must keep doing all through our lifespan is challenging our brain and doing things that are hard for our brain to do. And there's so many tools that we can outsource that to, so it's not as hard anymore. And I'm not sure whether we're then using the time that's apparently been freed up to do
meditation and things that is people like that, something that's good for your brain, but it's actually hard to do for a lot of people.
It's
so
really,
that's my advice to everybody. Use ChatGPT, do some meditation, some yoga, connect with loved ones.
ChatGPT's writing your emails.
Or writing the meditation for you.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Now we have to wrap it up, but we have one last question. What makes you feel great in your skin?
Oh, in my skin. My skin. Is,
within
that's
yourself.
Another whole podcast.
Yeah.
Because I have a very large forehead.
No, you don't.
I do. That cannot be injected. That's another whole podcast. Yeah. You know, the one thing in my life that makes me almost happier than anything else, and this is so cheesy and it's a little bit cringy, is my husband always brings me a coffee in bed in the morning.
Oh,
and I just, like, sometimes when I'm going to bed at night, I'm like, I can't wait till he brings me my coffee.
Oh, that's
and
so
I'm like,
nice.
it's the coffee, not him, that I'm very excited about.
I was thinking the coffee.
But he does that.
I just love coffee so much.
I just sit there and like I'm very lucky because I can see the ocean from my bed and I can watch the sun come up, and it's just such a, like, it's this tiny little thing. It's not a big deal. I've just so learned that it's just those little things. It's not the great big career blah stuff. It's just those little wee moments, and it just makes me so happy every day. I don't get up and meditate and write my list and do all the things. I'll probably scroll on Instagram, but I do just love that little moment every morning. It just makes me happy, and and I can start the day happy.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on In Your Skin. It has been really, really empowering, and I hope women take a lot from this. I know they will. Now, for the women that want to find you and find your book, where can they find it?
So, the books are in the shops.
Yeah.
So if you just go to Dr Sarah McKay or McKay.com, then that's the portal into the world of me. There's Instagram, and there's books, and there's whatever courses. Just come in and use that to channel through to whichever way you want to go. And and I'm always up for a chat. If anyone else wants to chat.
We've loved having you. So thank you.
Thank you.